example. Obviously, it's a non-quadratic equation, so we want to put it in quadratic form. So I'm looking at this middle term and I see an x squared. And I'm kind of thinking that my u here, change colors, my u here is going to be x squared. But if I put u here and I squared it, in other words, if I put x squared and I squared it, would I get x to the fourth? And if the answer is yes, then you can let your u be x squared. So in quadratic form, what I have going on is u squared, or sorry, x squared squared minus 13 x squared plus 36 equals 0. So this is a quadratic form. Something squared minus something times that plus a number equals 0. So now that it's in quadratic form, and I'm kind of thinking that my u is x squared, so I'm going to replace the x squared with a u. So anywhere I see an x squared, I'm going to put a u. So this would be u squared. This is 13 times u, and this is 36. Okay, now this does look like it's in a quadratic equation. So I'm going to factor it like I normally would into two numbers that multiply to be 36 and add up to negative 13. So those two numbers would be negative 9 and negative 4. And now after I factor it, I'm going to set each of them equal to 0. So my first one, u minus 9 equals 0, and then u minus 4 equals 0. Solve each of these equations, so add 9 to both sides, and u equals 9. Over here I'm going to add 4 to both sides, and I get u equals 4. So at this point, we've found the u solutions, but we haven't found the x solutions. So to go back to x, I'm going to reverse substitute. So earlier I put u in x squared's place. Now I'm going to put x squared into u's place. So u equals 9, that means x squared equals 9. U equals 4, that means x squared equals 4. Now I have these equations to solve. So remember, I want to square root both sides. If I square root both sides, it's a plus and minus version. So the square and the square root cancel. The square root of 9 is 3, but I have to have a plus and a minus. Same thing over here, square root both sides. That's a plus and minus. The square root of 4 is 2. The square root of x squared is x. So I have 4 different answers here actually, which makes sense because my highest power was 4. So I have a minus 3, a negative 3, a positive 3, a negative 2, and a positive 2. Those are my 4 answers to this equation. Let's try another one, trying to write it in quadratic form. So I always want to look at my middle term, and it's what is being multiplied by the number 5? Well, the thing being multiplied by the number 5 is the square root of x. So I'm thinking that might be my u. So if I tried writing this in quadratic form, it's got to be the u part squared and then it's minus 5 times that u part again. The rest of the equation goes plus 6 equals 0. So is it true that when I square the square root of x, would I just get an x? Yes, that is true. So this is the quadratic form here. And I'm going to substitute u in for the square root of x. So then it's going to be u squared minus 5u plus 6 equals 0. Now this is a quadratic equation. I can factor it into two sets of parentheses. I have u in my first position, two numbers that multiply to positive 6 and add up to negative 5. That's going to be a negative 2 and a negative 3. Now that I factored, I need to set each of them equal to 0. So u minus 2 equals 0 and u minus 3 equals 0 and solve. I get u equals 2 and u equals 3. But remember, we don't want u, we want x solution, so we got to substitute back in whatever we let u equal. So u was the square root of x, so the square root of x equals 2, and the square root of x equals 3. I need to get x by itself. How do I cancel out a square root? Well, I need to square both sides. That way the square root and square cancel, and I get x equals 4. Same thing over here, square both sides, and x equals 9. So here I only have two solutions, 4 and 9, which makes sense because, excuse me, which makes sense because I'm not going to have 4 solutions because my highest power isn't a 4 here. It was in the last one, that's why I had 4 solutions. So last one here, let's see if we can't figure out my u value here. I always want to look to my middle term and see if that will be my u. It's my u if I can square this and get my first term here. If I square x to the 1/3, I would get x to the 2/3. So in quadratic form, this is x to the 1/3 being squared minus x to the 1/3. And the rest of the equation goes minus 6 equals 0. So now that it's in quadratic form, remember I have the square, I have no square, and then I just have a number. Now that it's in quadratic form, I'm going to substitute u in for x to the 1/3. So this is u squared minus u minus 6 equals 0. I'm in quadratic form, so I want to factor into 2 sets of parentheses. 2 numbers that multiply to -6 and add up to -1. That's going to be a -3 and a +2. Set them both equal to 0 because of the zero product property. We've got to add 3. And u equals 3, subtract 2, and u equals -2. I don't want the u solutions, I want the x solutions, so let's substitute back in x to the 1/3 equals 3, x to the 1/3 equals -2. Well, how do I get rid of 1/3? Well, remember 1/3 is the cube root of x to the first. So how do I get rid of a cube root? Well, I need to cube both sides. The cube root and the cube will cancel, and here you're left with x equals 3 to the cube root, which is 27. Here I'm going to cube both sides again. The cube and the cube root cancel, and you're left with x equals -2 to the 3rd power, which means -2 times -2 times -2. These two would give you +4. +4 times -2 would give you -8. So my answer here is -8 and +27.